I think the situation in Ukraine is getting out of hand as far as the propaganda war is concerned. It's not just Bucha, which I talked about yesterday. Hopefully my video doesn't get taken down. I heard rumors that they're going to start pulling down videos about that, so I don't want to go into detail about that again. But honestly, at this point, I don't... What the truth is, or what the truth is not, doesn't matter in a practical sense. It matters for the historic record, yes. It will matter when we're looking back on this, in 10, 20, 30 years from now, 40 years, 100 years from now. The truth will matter, but as of right now, we're not going to convince people one way or the other, and frankly, we don't have enough information. You've got the New York Times putting out these satellite images that they claim are from one date, but then, some other people are looking at the pictures and saying, no, those pictures are clearly from a different date because it was after it rained or something like that. And, it's gotten to the point, it's bogged down in the minutia, and nobody's going to be convinced at this point. And I think that more things like Bucha, whatever you think it is, whoever you think did it, I think that we're going to see more of that moving forward. There's no reason why we wouldn't. It's having the desired effect, at least for one side. I won't say which. I don't want to get myself canceled off of YouTube just yet. I think I can remain somewhat coy and still get my point across. But let's just say that the Bucha massacre has been effective. And so, why would we not see more of it in the future? It has energized people in the West. Americans love this sort of thing. They love to see, these, evidence of atrocities, and then they cry out for intervention and for a war. Now, these types of media campaigns, some are more successful than others, and sometimes they don't even get popular opinion on their side, but they create enough of a pretext that people can accept the military action that's being taken. Situations, at least in my lifetime, where this has occurred. One was Serbia in 1999. We were told all these terrible things that the Serbs were doing in Kosovo, so we have to bomb Belgrade. And so, therefore, that's what happened. Then, of course, there's Afghanistan. The Taliban refuse to, hand over Osama bin Laden. That's what we were told. Doesn't really matter whether that was true or not. A lot of people have disputed that over the years, including at the time. But that doesn't matter. That was the pretext that got us into Afghanistan. Then, of course, we had, Saddam had his WMDs. That one backfired big time on the empire because it was such a blatant lie. Because when you say WMDs, they always talk about chemical weapons now. At the time, people were thinking about nukes. They were being told Saddam Hussein has nuclear weapons, or perhaps, like a dirty bomb, and he's going to give it to Al-Qaeda, and then Al-Qaeda is going to detonate it in the United States, in New York City. And I think the next big one was Libya. We were told Gaddafi is about to go genocidal, so we need a no-fly zone. Does that sound familiar? The U.S., France, and Britain implemented that no-fly zone in Libya. They came, they saw, he died. He, of course, being Gaddafi, he was sodomized to death in the streets. I saw it on CNN myself. I remember I was out to dinner the night that Gaddafi was killed, and it was censored, but they showed the video. It was quite graphic, and that was on CNN back in the day. They're very happy to show violence when it's being when it serves the narrative, and it was kind of sick in and of itself that they thought that was like a positive thing, like, hey, look, we got him. Even the great Hitler revisited Saddam Hussein. Even he got a show trial before he was executed. Gaddafi was, he got the Mussolini treatment. And of course, it was all based on nonsense, and Libya has been hell on earth ever since, with active slave markets. I don't have to tell any of you that. Whatever, evil plot Gaddafi had cooked up, I'm pretty sure it wasn't as bad as whatever it is Hillary and Sid Blumenthal and gosh, was it Francois Hollande back then, or was it Sarkozy? I think it was Francois Hollande in France and David Cameron in the UK. What they did to Libya, pretty sure it's worse than whatever Gaddafi, could ever dream of doing. But then we got to Syria, and that's where it stopped working. In Syria, we were told Assad gassed his own people, and so therefore we must intervene. We have a responsibility to protect, the same line that we got from Libya. We have a responsibility to protect the people of Syria and democracy, and so we got to go in and take down the dictator who gassed his own people. And that time it didn't work. There was enough pushback that we didn't overtly invade Syria. Now, we covertly invaded Syria, also raised a proxy army known as the Islamic State that was entirely, U.S. funded to overthrow the Syrian government. And ISIS's former territory in Syria has been taken over since they were dissolved, taken over by the United States, and has become a petro colony. Now, I skipped over a lot of events, but that's a basic outline of how we've gotten to this point as far as the propaganda war is concerned. So now we're being told, whether it's true or not, I'm not going to get into that, but the narrative that is being propagated is the Ruskies are committing genocide against the Ukrainians. These are mass executions, and people are being, their bodies are being dumped in the street, and they're being left there for weeks. And for some reason, the buzzards aren't eating them. I don't know. Maybe they don't have buzzards in Ukraine, but I know if you murdered 80 people and left their bodies in the streets, there would be nothing left of them after 2 weeks. But hey, I understand in the cold, maybe the worms don't live as well and these other things, and bugs. I know their bugs are quite small in cold areas. They don't have big bugs like we have here. And so maybe their buzzards, just don't get hungry. Maybe they go and hibernate for the winter or something like that, even though we're coming out of the winter. I don't know how cold it is in Ukraine. I don't think it's that cold. It seems like there's more rain and not snow on the ground. So one would think that means that they're above freezing most of the time. But again, none of that matters, because that's not what people are thinking. That's not what people are seeing on TV, and that's not what I think the ordinary person believes. I've said in the past, when I talk to people who, people just that I know in my daily life, regardless of their party affiliation, regardless of what they think of Trump or whatever, they all pretty much have the same view of this war. They think it's going terrible for Russia. The Russians are desperate. Their economy is being crushed under, what do they call it? Backbreaking sanctions or something like that. And of course, Vladimir Putin is literally Hitler and would do anything, the most evil thing in the world. In fact, I was talking to someone who was telling me about a customer of his who's Russian, and he said, the last couple of weeks I just can't look at him the same, and I think, gee, could he be a Russian spy? Could he be working for Putin? I just don't know if I can trust him anymore. I mean, this is the level of Putin derangement syndrome that has swept the United States. And this was a Trump supporter I was talking to. This isn't even someone who's been Russiagated, for 4 years and been primed to think that there's a Russian hiding, there's a Russian spy hiding behind, every bush and under every rock. And so there's not going to be a lot of people who are in the mood to question this sort of thing, especially if we start seeing more of them pop up. And remember, it was this way in Syria. It wasn't just Duma. There were other places. There were multiple so-called gas attacks in which Assad, the evil perpetrator, gassed his own people, the innocent members of Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra who, are just wanted to stand up for democracy and women's rights. Remember, we were told that the Syrian rebels were largely secular, and that we could fund the moderate rebels, and that, those Al-Qaeda guys, they were just a small faction. Yes, the Al-Qaeda doesn't like Assad, but, they're not the main fighting force. The Free Syrian Army, the Syrian Democratic Forces, those are the guys that we are backing. You know, just like now we're being told, oh no, those neo-Nazis in Ukraine, they're a small fringe group. You know, nobody pays attention to them. They have no real influence within the military. You know, we're backing the good guys. We're backing the moderate established order in Ukraine. Obviously, they're not rebels because they're fighting off an invasion. And I'll be honest, it's easier to sell this for the American people because these guys aren't Arabs. They're not people who they've been primed to think are terrorists. It's harder to, you know, it's easier to convince someone that your average Syrian rebel, especially once you got in a couple years into the Syrian civil war, was just an Al-Qaeda guy. Because deep down, a lot of Americans just look at all Arabs and think of them as terrorists. You know, I mean, the appearance of an Arab garb, is synonymous with the word terrorism for many, many Americans. And I don't mean dumb trailer park people. I mean, you know, well-educated people, you know, doctors and lawyers. But Ukrainians, I don't mean to sound like a leftist, but I mean these Ukrainians, they're white Europeans. They don't look scary. Even with swastika tattoos on their necks, you know, you have these suburban white women just, well, I shouldn't say. I was going to say something quite dirty. But let's just say that they are aroused by the sight of these men. They're not frightened by them. They're not off-put. You know, they're very sympathetic towards them. And so all these factors make it much easier to propagandize the American people into being enraged against the Ruskies, into being 100% behind the cause of the Ukrainians and the people fighting in Ukraine against the Ruskies. They are perfectly satisfied with a pure good versus pure evil narrative with, you know, no shades of gray in between. And so this is what makes stories like Bucha so dangerous, and why I think there will be more of them. Bucha in and of itself is not enough. But we get enough of these. I don't know how the sanctions can be increased. I don't know what more you could do. I mean, maybe they'll find something, but I think all the big guns, you know, they've already been fired off. We're near maximum sanctions. And so after that, the next step really is the no-fly zone. And once you get people angry enough, you know, most people have no idea what a no-fly zone is anyway. They didn't know what it was in Libya. They didn't learn because, you know, once the Libya thing was over in their eyes, they stopped paying attention. They never thought about it again. You know, remember, Libya was over 10 years ago now. Yes, Hillary and many of the Republicans in 2016 were running on a no-fly zone in Syria precisely because the American people did not learn their lesson from Libya. And a lot of them really didn't know what that meant in Syria. They didn't know that a no-fly zone in Syria meant war with Russia. And likewise today, a lot of them don't believe that a no-fly zone in Ukraine would lead to war with Russia. But even if you told them that, a lot of them would still be for it, because they're that whipped up into a frenzy. From the beginning, I've not wanted to take a side in this. From the beginning, this has not been my fight. It's not been relevant to me other than the external consequences, you know, the sanctions and whatnot, and the disruptions to the supply chain that will affect me and the people around me to a great extent. But the war itself, the matters on the ground, I find them interesting to study and analyze, but they don't personally affect me, and I don't have an emotional stake in it. You know, whether the Ukrainians take back some town or if the Russians, you know, capture some new town. I'm interested in knowing what the truth is, but I don't really care which one of them is winning or losing. But I can very much see at this point how the people who already were 100% on the side of the Ukrainians, how they can be persuaded to accept dangerous intervention in this conflict if they are told stories, whether they are confirmed or unconfirmed, whether they are proven or unproven, of anything that can be construed as a Russian atrocity in Ukraine. They are perfectly willing to ignore any proven or unproven atrocities committed by people associated with the Ukrainian side, because frankly they're not shown to them, and that goes completely counter to the black and white narrative. There are never two sides to a war as far as the American people are concerned. There's the good side and there's the evil side. And so once they've decided who the good side is, that side can do no wrong in their eyes. And so that's where we're at now. Bad things are happening in Ukraine. It's a war. Atrocities are committed. That's a guarantee. Especially once, we're a month into this. Think about it, over the years, how many atrocities have been committed, in the terror wars. We're a month in now. There's going to be a lot more atrocities in the future. And it doesn't matter who the perpetrator is. These atrocities are going to fuel more interest in American intervention. It's one reason why I think that it's essential for there to be a negotiated settlement as soon as possible. And I've pointed out in the past how I think that the Russians probably at this point are going to look less favorably upon a negotiated settlement, because they're, after they've expended so much, they feel like they want to try and get more. They want to probably grab more land and get more concessions out of the Ukrainians than they initially did, because of the hardship that they've had to endure. But the longer this goes on and the more bodies pile up, the more pressure there will be within the United States to do more. And even if it's not, American bombers, trying to attack Russians directly or something that extreme, any escalation is going to be detrimental to, at the very least, the people here in the United States. People have no idea how bad things are going to get for us here. The sanctions alone are going to have a significant impact on our standards of living. We're trying to cut Russian resources off from the global economy and tell the Russians, you can't market these to other people, essentially saying that we're going to reduce the supply of these essential resources: oil, gas, coal, fertilizer, food. And the direct impact of that will, of course, be to, within this Western-aligned segment of the world, within the Western world order, it will be to increase the cost of oil, gas, food, i.e. life itself. We are going to become much poorer. And that's even without a shooting war. That's without any military involvement. Remember what the lesson was from Bucha and from the other Syrian gas attacks. Remember who benefited. It was the Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra-esque rebels, the jihadis, who benefited from that, because they were trying to make it look like Assad was crossing Barack Obama's red line, his famous red line, so that the U.S. would be goaded into intervening on their behalf. No matter who you think committed the atrocities in Bucha, this event is going to have the same effect. And certainly the Ukrainians, whether or not this was committed by the Russians or not, certainly they have a great deal of interest in making it seem that way, so as to encourage the Americans to intervene on their behalf. So where will the next atrocity be committed? How strong will the push be after that? What will the media be saying? What narrative are we going to get? What set of actions are we going to be told must be taken to save the lives of innocent women and children? That I do not know. But what I do know is that it will make my life worse, it will make the life of my neighbors worse, and it will do almost certainly nothing to help the people in Ukraine. I think at this point that's the most important message you can try and convey. If you have friends who are swept up in this war fever, sit them down, talk to them about the interventions in the past, talk to them about Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and ask them whether they think any of those people are better off now. No matter whether the motivation for intervening in these places is 100% pure and 100% above board, no shenanigans took place. The reality is that the U.S. involving itself in overseas conflicts and wars always makes the lives of the people there much worse, and it leads, of course, on a much smaller scale to the deaths of Americans and, suffering here at home for the families who have lost loved ones of fighting for absolutely nothing. Because that's what it means to die in one of these American wars that has taken place, at the very least, since World War II. I don't want to get into talking about the world wars, but pretty much all the wars since, well, I guess, let's say Korea, you can say that they achieved freedom for South Korea or something like that. But the 63,000 Americans who died in Vietnam died for nothing. The Americans who died in Afghanistan died for nothing. The Americans who died in Iraq died for nothing. The Americans who died in Syria died for nothing. The Americans who died in Libya died for nothing. And that's at the bare minimum. If you wanted to be more critical, you could say that they actually died for a very bad cause. Their deaths furthered not, justice and freedom, but they furthered hell on earth. And this is by no means a vindication of, the Russian military and whatever it is they do around the world, although mostly they seem to stick to their own neighborhood. They deal with their neighbors, like Kazakhstan and Syria and Ukraine. But I don't want to act like everything they do is wonderful there. Wars are bad. War is mass murder. So no matter who's waging it, if they're not doing everything they can to end that war, they're bad guys. It's just a matter of, how bad. And, they may or may not be worse than the other guys. Usually when you got a war going on, you've got as many bad sides as you have sides in general. If it's a two-sided war, normally you got two bad sides. If it's a multi-sided war like the Syrian Civil War, just about every side were bad. And so these bleeding hearts who want to make themselves feel good, who want to, back the good guys, they do that, and one day they wake up and they're next to a jihadi, they're next to an Al-Qaeda guy, the next day they're next to a slave auctioneer, the next day they wake up next to a neo-Nazi. Whereas I'm called, a Nazi sympathizer for not wanting to get into bed with these people to begin with. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.